the Canadian East Coast all the way down to the Indian River Lagoon in Florida, all the way along that side. And we grow. So this tour is basically dedicated to that. It's dedicated to understanding the clams and the life cycle of it. It's not just a clam hatchery tour, if that's what you're thinking it is. We're going to do the whole life cycle of the clams. It'll take 45 minutes to an hour depending on how many questions you ask. Anytime during the thing, feel free to ask a question. If you ask a question about something that's coming further up in the line of the tour, I'll tell you to hold on and hold that question till then. A couple rules real quick. While we're in the hatchery, and you're just going to do a walkthrough in the hatchery, just do not stick your hands in any of the vats, any of the tanks. Resist the temptations to touch things. Just walk through carefully. The other thing is it's a working hatchery, so there's hoses and water and stuff all over the floor in there, but it's true the rest of the way. So watch your footing, watch your feet, be careful. All right, so this first part's very uninteresting for the kids. But the second part's really cool, so it's all worth it when you get there, all right? All right, so I'm going to try to explain this, and then we're going to see it in there. The northern quahog twice a year makes itself ready to spawn, and will spawn the babies. There's male and females. You can't tell the difference from looking at them, but that twice a year time is the fall and the spring of each year. And during that time, when they're ready to spawn, we'll take what we call our brood stock, our mom and dads, pull them out and house them in a cold tank out back. The reason we do that is because it's a fluctuation in temperature during the spring and fall. This is true for oysters too, by the way. That triggers them to spawning. So we'll take them and take them out of the natural waters, which the temperature is fluctuating, and put them into a 65-degree cooler out back, in which the temperature is a constant 63 degrees or something like that. And what that does is never allow them to know that it's actually fall or spring. So we're tricking them. So then what we'll do is we'll take those, we'll put them in a little tank. I'll show you that tank when we go out there. It's a little tiny a tray that has water on top of it. We'll let them open up. The clams will open up and stick out their bivalve and start filtering in and pumping out water. They're basically a roll pump. For the boat people here, you have a pump in the water in a boat. It's sucking in water, filtering out what it wants, and blowing it back out. Same way an oyster works, only they don't have a bivalve. So they'll all be sitting on top of that table, maybe 200 of them. We don't know if they're boys or girls if we haven't spawned them yet. Typically, so then what we do is we trick them to thinking it's spring or fall. We fluctuate the temperature of the water back and forth. We have a hot water tank and a cold water tank. We'll take it and fluctuate the temperature back and forth and try to trick them into thinking, hey, it's springtime, it's time to spawn. The second thing that makes them spawn is there'll be a couple of the boys get jumpy, and they'll release their sperm into the water column. In our case on this table, every clam on that table would realize it very quickly that there's sperm in the water. Other boys would release their sperm just because they want their genetics to be passed on and it's time. And then some of the girls will start letting out their eggs. All of it's the same way. Their bivalves out, they're filtering out the water, they're blowing it back out, they release the sperm or egg into that blowout into the water column. And so what has to happen is inside our little tiny tank, the sperm and the egg have to meet within that, which it's a tiny tank, not like the Gulf of Mexico. It's a good chance that they'll meet, and so they'll meet, and the sperm will fertilize the egg. And after that, that process can take. If it goes quickly, it could be an hour. If it goes for a long time, it may take 2 or 3 or 4 hours, depending on how ready or accepting they are that it's time to spawn, and how physically ready they are to spawn. If they're really full and ready to just let it all loose. So after that happens, you have fertilized eggs on the table. We will drain those eggs off the table onto a fine mesh screen, catching the fertilized eggs. Everything else hopefully will fall through. We'll take those and put them into a big larvae tank. So as we walk in, we're going to walk around the back way. The first thing you'll see is a 600-gallon larvae tank. And the idea behind it is just 600 gallons of seawater that has some oxygen added to it, some air pumped through it. And we'll stick 6 to 10 million of those fertilized eggs in each one of those 600-gallon tanks. They will they will live for 7 to 10 days in that tank while they're still larvae. The cool thing about it is by the second day, we spawn them the one day, and then the next morning you can look at them under a scope and they look like a little clam. They no longer look like a little single-celled egg. They'll sit in that tank for 7 to 10 days. We'll feed them. Our clams eat algae. They're phytoplankton eaters, so we will feed them some of the algae that we grow. I'll explain that part to you maybe before we go into. So the 7 to 10 days they're sitting in the larval tank. They're swimming around in the water column, feeding on that algae that we feed them, and then after that 7 to 10 days, they will lose the ability to swim. They'll fall to the bottom. Mike will drain that whole tank into another onto another screen or a sieve and catch as many of those as he can. He'll catch them all, and then transfer them into a downweller. The downwellers are going to be lining the opposite wall that you'll see, and they're basically long, 8-foot long tanks, and enough room in there for 3 silos to sit in them. A silo is and we don't have one sitting here. I'll show you when we get in there, but it's basically a fiberglass silo with a screen, a fine mesh screen that's put onto the bottom. When you put the little clams in there, they'll sit on the bottom of that screen. I told you this part will be boring. I understand. It'll be better when we get out there. We start feeling the little baby clams. So they're sitting on the little screen, and they're filtering too. They're sticking out their little tiny baby microscopic bivalves and eating the food that we feed them every day. When Mike feeds them, he drained the water about 4 inches in one of those tanks. That tank is a recirculating tank. It just keeps pumping that water in that 60-gallon tank and filling into those silos where the clams are feeding. In 24 hours or less, that water will be crystal clear where they've eaten every bit of algae in it. He'll drain it, he'll fill it back up with the algae, and then do it the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day. So to give you an idea, is that as long as there's clams in our hatchery, they have to be fed every single day. So Mike on his birthday or Christmas or Easter, somebody is here, and it's generally Mike taking care of them. So it is a constant thing that you have to keep up with. One of the harder parts would be the food, the algae that we feed them. It is we buy test tubes of algae from algae collection sites around the country. University of Texas has a big one. Bigelow Labs in Maine. There's several others around the country that you can buy them from. So you'll order a small little test tube, pay a large amount of money, and then try to rear that. And the way that works, algae works through photosynthesis. So the sun is what's making the algae cells take and split and become 2, and then 4, then 8, then 16. So it works very quickly. It's Christmas when the UPS man's driving a Penske truck. So what Mike will do is we have a tall tank. You'll see those along the inside of the walls, a tall 60-gallon tank that holds its clear fiberglass sides. It has lights behind it, so our lights are fake sunlight that we're working on. And then we'll fill it up with 60 gallons of water, add 5 gallons from a carboy in our algae room, our starter batches, and then add some algae food. And so then you have this light colored, you'll see the different colors as you go in there. You have this light color algae that over every day darkens as it gets a thicker, a larger and larger amount of algae cells in the tank. And after about day 6 or 7, it's time to feed them to the animals. So it takes about 6 days for that to work.